What's up, my friends? Welcome to Digital Academy. You haven't heard that in a while. It's been quite a while since I've made content specifically for this channel, but I was talking to a past student, a dear friend that kind of gave me a push to get back into this. So this one's dedicated to Emily and D'Angelo and Aiden. Let's do this. This one I'm going to be, and to you guys, because you've been kind of pushing me to get back into this a bit, I feel, and I love you for it. So I just wanted to kind of take a few minutes and start getting into a little bit new angle of content. Who is Nimrod? This character we hear of from the Old Testament. I think you'll find this interesting. Video watching positions. And I sort of took this, if anyone has wondered where I've been mainly making content for my other channel through my work with the University of Nipissing. And if you're interested in all, you can just type in NU, the letters NU, Digital Classroom, and find all that content. All right, let's get into this on Nimrod. Guarantee you'll find this pretty interesting.
Mysterious and infamous characters in the Bible. Nimrod is one of the most mysterious and infamous characters in the Bible. You've probably heard a plethora of tales about this figure. Most of them are wholeheartedly concocted out of thin air and have no basis in history. But the reason they exist is because we know so little about who this person really was. All we have to go on is this brief passage in Genesis 10, which is why conspiracy theorists have tried to fill in the details with wild theories that just lack evidence. However, once we push past these, there are sound, scholarly approaches that give us reasonable possibilities as to who Nimrod was.
Biblical archaeology. Cool. Nimrod. Who's Nimrod?
There are several candidates offered by scholars as to who Nimrod was, which include ancient rulers such as Naram-Sin, Amenhotep III, Gilgamesh, Anemarkar, and many other possibilities.
Marduk.
Having looked at the different theories, I'll present two theories I think are the most likely explanations. All of these are unprovable, but given what the Bible says about Nimrod, we can still make educated guesses. First, let's go over what the Bible says about him. He was said to come from the line of Cush, and was something of a mighty man and a hunter. He also was an empire builder. The beginning of his kingdom was at the city of Babel, which might be a reference to Babylon, as well as the city of Uruk and Akkad, and another city called Calneh. Then he
Yeah, see this? Oh man, it's already super interesting. First of all, I wonder if Cush with a C and Cush with a K is the same ancient culture. I also wonder if Akkad and Acadia are academic, if there's a link there. Obviously the Tower of Babel, the Uruk. I think this is like Egypt. Oh, Sumeria. Yeah, so Egypt. I mean, I said Egypt twice, but I meant Iraq. Yeah, so who was this ancient biblical figure that seems to kind of, when you actually look away from sort of surface interpretations, actually seems to be this common motif in a lot of these ancient cultures?
Conquered the region of Assyria and built up other cities like Nineveh. So what we are told is of a king who reigned in the region of Sumer and then took over the region of Assyria. Now when we study the ancient Near East, this actually happened a few times. The first time it happened was at the rise of the Akkadian Empire, under someone called Sargon of Akkad. Oddly enough, when we compare the life and acts of Sargon, they surprisingly fit with the description of Nimrod in interesting ways, which is why some scholars suggest the biblical Nimrod is just a description of Sargon. First, Nimrod was said to be a descendant of Cush. He probably was not a direct son, since he's not listed in verse 7. It is often assumed the descendants of Cush moved south into Ethiopia, but the reality is, it is likely they would have spread out and moved in different directions, as most people do. Some scholars have suggested that Kazites of Iran and the city of Kish could be connected to the descendants of Cush in some sort of way.
There it is spelled with a K.
And Sargon actually was originally from the city of Kish. Now, as we noted in our video on the Table of Nations, sonship did not necessarily mean a biological connection. So Sargon could have been seen as a descendant of Cush being from the city of Kish. Second, one might object that Sargon doesn't translate
So son might not mean biological son. It might mean from the same place or lineage or school of thought.
to Nimrod. But this issue is easily dealt with, mainly because Sargon is probably not his actual birth name. Yigilavin says, "We know very little about Sargon of Akkad himself. His real name is unknown. Sarukin, meaning the true king in Akkadian, is obviously a throne name.
True king.
So perhaps Sargon's real name was something like Nimrod.
Right, so it's something like Caesar, where it's not like Caesar's name. It's Caesar is like a title.
But it is also entirely possible the name Nimrod is just a slang term. The name basically means we shall rebel. So it probably was a way for the Hebrew authors to say that rebellious one, almost as a way to insult him, instead of naming him directly. Next, the text refers to him and how he began to be a mighty man. Some translations render this to mean he was the first on the earth to be a mighty man.
Mighty man.
And Sargon, in a way, is the first empire builder. However, Gary Allen Long and Douglas Petrovich argue it could mean profaning or acting irreverently in order to become powerful on the earth. This would fit with Sargon, but it could also fit with a number of other possibilities. The next line has thrown a lot of people off. Why does it note that Nimrod was a hunter?
Yeah.
Well, it was a common motif in the ancient Near East to speak of kings as mighty and accomplished hunters of wild animals.
Dragon slayers, kind of.
There aren't any reliefs that have been found depicting Sargon this way, but a lot of what existed from that time period has been lost. Either way, we do have plenty of evidence for the theme. Steles from the 4th millennia BC at Uruk depict the king as a hunter. It is a well-known theme in Mari, Mycenae, during the New Kingdom of Egypt, and also in classical Greek literature.
Whoa, cool. That's
Such
a well-done video.
The first Mesopotamian ruler to boast of prowess in hunting was Tiglath-Pileser I of Assyria, who titled himself Valiant Man, armed with the unrivaled bow, expert in the hunt. He reports slaying wild bulls, elephants, and 920 lions. The theme was renewed almost 4 centuries later by Ashurbanipal. The Hebrew version of the legend then included this Western motif of royal courage.
Royal courage.
So being depicted as a hunter fits with the cultural context and could fit with a number.
It's interesting, like how that relates to, like, say, like the stories around St. Andrew in Scotland.
Of rulers, including Sargon. The next 3 verses generally align with how Sargon built his empire. He started in the region of Sumer and then went north and conquered the region of Assyria. 2 aspects need to be addressed in verse 10. First, there is no issue with 2 of the cities mentioned. Even though we don't know where the city of Akkad was, it is mentioned several times in ancient Near Eastern literature. And the city of Uruk is not contested. But there is no trace of a city named Calna in southern Mesopotamia. Talmudic literature identifies Calna with Nofer Ninfi, which could be a reference to the city of Nippur. Another more likely possibility proposed by William Albright is to amend the vocalization of the Hebrew word, which would then translate as, "in all of them, in the land of Sumer," which would just be another way of saying the rest of the cities in the area. Of course, the third possibility is Calne is just another city that hasn't been located yet, much like Akkad. The second problem is during the time of Sargon, Babylon was not yet a city. Albright once said he had evidence that Sargon built Babylon opposite of Akkad, but unfortunately he never produced his evidence. Douglas Petrovich has argued Babel in Genesis 10 should be a reference to the ancient city of Eridu. To his credit, there are several texts that equate Babylon with Eridu. The cities are equated by Berossus. A.R. George also lists several other early texts that equate Eridu and Babylon, and indicate the traditions of Eridu became that of Babylon. For example, in one creation myth, Ea establishes Ezagil, and Eridu and Babylon are considered one, even in this very ancient time. So given the wealth of data on this, it is likely Babylon was seen as the new Eridu, and Eridu was seen as the Old Babylon. Therefore, the Babel of Genesis 10 and 11 could be a reference to Eridu, not the later New Babylon established under the Amorites. Finally, the reference to Nimrod moving into the land of Assyria works for the most part. The verb for build can also refer to rebuilding or fortifying, and does not necessarily have to mean the cities did not exist prior to Sargon. Two of the cities, Nineveh and Calah, are easily identifiable. The other two have not been identified. But this is not a huge problem, since many ancient cities that have appeared in records have not been identified in archaeology. So Sargon could fit the description of Nimrod. But there is another interesting option, which is to identify Nimrod with the later Amorite king Hammurabi. Hammurabi also had a kingdom that began in Sumer and extended into Assyria. Since he was a king, it is likely the motif of him being depicted as a hunter could easily apply as well, and the term Nimrod could easily be understood as a Hebrew title. Hammurabi was occasionally called
Yeah, here, let me just pause and read this. So this is Genesis 10, verse 6. And the subtitle is The Descendants of Ham. And they showed up there, Ham, on one of the maps of the region. The descendants of Ham, or maybe it was a king that controlled that area, were Cush, Merizima, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Halbanet, Sabata, Ramah, Sabeka. The descendants of Ramah were Sheba, that's interesting, and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Interesting. Since he was the greatest hunter in the world, he became proverbial. So he became like the hunter. People would say, this man like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world, he built the kingdoms and the lands of Babylon with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akedia, and Calneh, the ones he just said. From there, he expanded the territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh, Rabutuari, Calah, and Rezin. These were the descendants of Ham, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. So sometimes it was by clan, sometimes it was because they spoke the same language, or territory, they came from the same place, or they had the same national identity. For example, being Babylonians or Akkadians.
Ugal-Mardu, meaning king of the Amorites. But John Walton notes another word for king was En, and a title such as En-Mardu does supply the necessary consonants that could have resulted in the Hebraic name Nimrod. The only difficulty is the Amorites were said to be from the line of Canaan, not Cush. However, the
Okay, so this is what I just read, that Ham had these descendants, Canaan. Oh, that's interesting. So that lays it out in a chart. If you were to pause and take a picture, if you're interested, that's like the biblical ancestry tree.
The Sumerian term for Amorite meant Westerner, and it could possibly have been the case that several people migrating from the West were all seen as the same people, or all just called Amorites. As Mark Chavalas says, it appears that the Amorites were not a people in any ethnic or political sense. The idea that they were social outsiders also appears to be outdated. Porter has proposed that they had social ties to local populations, mobile herding communities, belonged to the same peoples as their settled counterparts. Thus, they were not a separate people, but one dimension of the general populace. So Hammurabi's line could have mixed in with Westerners moving into Sumer, and would have been considered an Amorite, even though he was not a Canaanite. This is possible, but still unprovable and speculative. As for the Bible indicating the Amorites were an ethnic group that descended from Canaan, it's possible there was an ethnic group called the Amorites, and the Sumerians just picked up on it and called everyone in the West.
So if you see from Ham down there, 1, 2, 3 lines, you can see the Amorites. Especially if you rewind a bit, get the picture a little clearer.
Amorite. But a more likely explanation is to remember biblical sonship does not necessarily mean a biological connection. Canaan could have been said to be the father of the Amorites, just like how Jabal and Jubal were said to be the father of anyone with a specific profession. Canaan was the representative father of the Amorites, even though
His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who played the lyre and the pipe. That's interesting because, like, okay, so Jubal was the name of the person or kind of the line of musicians. That's pretty interesting. I wonder if that's, this is just totally throwing it out there, but I wonder if that's where the word Jubilee comes from, since it seems to have a similar root word.
Canaan was the representative
Jubal.
father of the Amorites, even though a specific Amorite king could have actually come from the line of Cush. At the end of the day, this brief passage about Nimrod seems to be about a king who began in Sumer and took over the region of Assyria. In my view, the most likely candidates are Sargon and Hammurabi, but these are only educated guesses, and there are other possibilities. But given the description of Nimrod includes known ancient cities, correlates to how ancient Near Eastern kings were depicted, and can correlate with events that historically happened, it is probable the Hebrew authors are describing a real king that conquered the regions of Sumer and Assyria instead of a mythological figure.
Hey guys, just want to thank you for checking this out. It's like, I'm not a biblical scholar by any sense, but I've been fascinated by this my whole life. My profession is more teaching in psychology and stuff like that, but and philosophy. But the religious motifs underlie so much of our culture. So it's really interesting to kind of dive into some of these early ones. And again, if you're watching this and checking it out and it helps you get through your day a bit, or have an interesting thought, then it served its purpose. I love you guys, and there'll be more coming. This is going to be the start of, I'm going to get back to this channel, and I got the batteries changed in my back, and I'm ready to get back to it. Love you. Cheers.